Joined tonight by Benedict Spence and Susie Boniface. So let's dive straight in, Benedict, because I know you're full of excitement for the papers this evening. Let's talk... well, what are we talking about first? Let's talk about the FT and this ban on asylum hotels reversed. Clearly, it's in a few of the papers tomorrow as well, but let's take the FT as our lead there. And, of course, they've got someone with the George Cross draped over their back there.
Yeah, so this is a decision that's been taken. The Court of Appeal has ruled that the injunction on the use of the Bell Hotel in Epping, the hotel can in fact be used to house asylum seekers, to house migrants. This is obviously going to cause all sorts of mischiefs from both the Conservatives and Reform, but we'll put that to one side. We'll get into that, that sort of the hijinks of that later. First and foremost, the appeal was brought by the Home Secretary on the basis of this being a national interest thing. That it was being sort of spun. I saw it in the Telegraph yesterday as the rights of migrants trump the rights of local people. That's not quite actually what we're talking about. We're talking about a nation that needs to put people somewhere, and in certain circumstances that means putting them in hotels. Obviously, that's not gone down particularly well. We all understand why, but the fact remains, until the country can find some sort of system in which it can put people that everybody can agree is good, these are facilities that exist, this is where these people are going. The plan that's been put forward to take people out of hotels and to put them into housing isn't in place yet. I think that's due to come in by 2029, so that's a long way off. And even when that happens, there are going to be all kinds of logistical issues that come up with that. In the short term, this is not a great solution, but it is perhaps the best available of a very bad bunch. However, obviously, then we get to the hijinks. You're going to get an awful lot of pushback on this. Local communities, you're going to get people saying that it's not safe, that they're not being consulted, and again, they're going to be very upset that they view this as their rights being trampled on. And of course, I think Reform and the Conservatives, if they still exist, are going to make political hay out of this, or try to. So I don't think this actually resolves anything. It's simply going to make things just a little bit spicier.
There are 32,000 people currently, Susie, in those hotels. And the interesting thing about the Bell in Epping were there was some specifics around this court case. That doesn't mean it can be replicated with other councils. Nevertheless, the Times says 13 potential other councils want to bring their own actions, even if they're not like for like, the same as what's happened in Epping.
Yeah, and I think probably most people, when you see these stories, because we're talking about the protests and the views of the people around them, pro and against, not really talking about what's actually happened with some of the niceties here. So the court hearing was not about whether or not asylum seekers can stay in a hotel. The court hearing was about a previous court hearing, which had said you must stop doing this until we have a full hearing. They've then appealed that and said, well, we can't stop it now, let's have the full... So all that's happened is we're now going to the proper hearing about the issue of this one hotel.
It's been all temporary injunctions, haven't
It's all temporary injunctions that have stopped something happening. That's all been lifted now, because you can't stop something before you've even had the court decision on whether or not you can do it. That's a bit mad. So we've still yet got to have the actual row and the actual court hearing about whether or not the Bell Hotel can keep having asylum seekers. And even then, it is not having an argument about whether asylum seekers should or shouldn't be housed in hotels. It focuses on planning law and the fact that this amenity for the community has been lost because it's no longer a hotel, and it's attracting all these protests. So all those other hotels that you're talking about, the other 13, which have not all had protests outside them, they're going to try and argue that because there might be protests, they ought to shut down the hotel that no one was staying in anyway, because that was why the guy leased it out to the asylum seeker. And it's just, like Benedict said, it's just going to create a rolling catastrophe of news, which only one man is going to be able to surf and benefit from, which is Mr. Farage.
My word, won't
everybody else,
whilst he does it.
Everybody else is going to just get absolutely choked in the backwash, because there is no happy way out of this for anyone.
It's interesting just to mention that picture, of course, on the front page of the Times is Angela Rayner. That's to do with housing of an entirely different type, her own housing. We'll get to that story a little bit later on, because that is also in several of the papers, prompted by what was in the Telegraph today, as it happens. Let's stay with the migrants' decision madness, as the Sun calls it. Benedict, striking image on their front page as well of someone flying the flag. That's Sarah White flying the Union flag outside the Bell Hotel last night. Injustice is their headline.
I think There is. I do understand that there is an awful lot of, and this is, we'll come on to the story, there's a story about Reform's polling that we'll probably get to later on, but it's all sort of caught up, I think, in a general sense of frustration. And I don't think you can put it down to any one thing. Right now, migration is at the top of the list. It has risen to the top. It could very easily be supplanted by something else that the government has seen very obviously not to be handling very well. I think that's sort of the cool thing here, is that Keir Starmer, at the start of his premiership, said, this is something that the Conservatives got wrong, which they did, and I'm going to get tough and I'm going to stop the boats, which I think Rishi Sunak also said. And I think you're all kind of sat there going, oh, this sounds a little bit familiar and it didn't go well for the last time, the last time somebody else tried to do it, but you do you. And here we are a year later and it hasn't got any better.
Yeah.
So it was a very visually obvious example of state failure. There are many other reasons why people are very despondent, upset right now. People are protesting because a lot of people say that this is a threat, say, to their local community, but there are many other reasons also why they feel upset about the goings-on in their local community. For as long as this isn't dealt with, and, Susie said this is just going to keep sort of crawling on and not getting dealt with, it will be, I think, a very visual thing, partly because, as you see, you've got the whole flag protest thing going on. The flag protest in of itself is quite an empty gesture because it is literally just that. Flags don't actually achieve anything. But I think the fact that so many people are doing it is a sign that frustrations are starting to boil over. There's been lots of talk about people saying, oh, the country's on the path to civil war. I don't think it is. I don't think anybody thinks actually, truly, we're anywhere near that stage. But it does show, I think, that a form of civil disobedience that just didn't really exist is starting to emerge. And I think that is also mirrored in Reform's polling. I don't think that it's a massive ideological thing. I think it's a protest thing.
It's interesting, isn't it, calling it civil disobedience? You think other countries flying the flag of that country wouldn't be seen in that way at all. Is that an interesting thing?
I'm old enough to remember, I think maybe about 15 years ago, when the coalition Conservative-led government was sort of painting working-class people who waved the flag as the feckless underbelly of British society that was the problem.
There was certain senior Labour members who
and they did,
made
and
light of someone flying an England flag.
It was done as, this is the thing that will make the middle class angry enough to get off the sofa and vote for me. Therefore, I am going to say it's those people over there that's the problem. And that's changed from being about the white working class who fly flags and doing something that will provoke them too, as well as the middle class. But it's moved to immigration, and it's purely because that's what gets the middle class angry. And a few years ago, the Sun would have been criticising Sarah. Not that long ago, really. And anyone who waves flags outside football would have been treated as some kind of social outcast.
I do think it's a sort of it's uniquely tied to class in this country, is the sort of the embarrassment about people who wave the flag versus people who don't. What I think is curious is that it's sort of emerging now at the exact same moment that a lot of the middle classes are being dragged, sort of kicking and screaming, into a financial situation that is actually actively impoverishing a lot of them. They can see their living standards collapsing before their eyes. They can measure it over the last 2 to 3 years, not 10 years. And I think that's it's all part of the sort of the heady cocktail that breaks down in sport for the major parties and the rise of the fringe parties.
Let me quickly mention the Daily Express. Government should hang their heads in shame as their headline furious. The Home Office wins appeal for asylum seekers to stay at Epping's Bell Hotel. And if we whiz on to the Daily Telegraph as well, slightly different tack from them, Susie, because they say migrants at Epping Bell Hotel rejoice at court victory.
It's a brilliant, brilliant headline if you actually read the story to find the rejoicing, which you'd imagine, right, well, they're having a party. They've got some cans in, they've got some music going, everything's marvellous. They've actually got 3 bylines on this. They've had 3 journalists trying to get the migrants rejoicing, and they've actually got to, in the 3rd paragraph, one migrant in his 30s who'd been told not to speak to the public or leave his hotel room messaged to say, I am pleased. It had been a worry. That is the extent of the rejoicing. The rest of the copy, and this is more on page 6, I haven't seen, so far on the front page, that is the extent of the rejoicing. It's a text message going, well, that's a relief.
So there's an error. They should take out the S after migrants, and then it's actually completely accurate.
Migrant. It's still a slightly different tack from the Telegraph to all the other papers, it has to be said. Let's just finish off this part of our chat looking at the Eye Weekend. And look, it is related to this, of course. Reform takes a shock 15-point lead over Labour as Farage dreams of taking power. We know that Reform has been leading the polls, but this is a significant gap, Benedict. And look, we've got a long way to go until the next general election, but certainly the things stand today, they have momentum.
We're creeping up to the point at which they have the same numbers as Labour and the Conservatives combined. We're not quite there yet, but we're nearly there.
Yes.
And that is remarkable. I don't think that you can factor this into Farage's latest announcement about migration. I don't think that they quite correlate. So let's wait and see actually how that goes down. But I go back to what I said earlier. I don't look at Reform and I think there's a major sort of radical ideological vision here that's being broadcast to the public very coherently. I do genuinely think right now it is simply that a lot of voters are thoroughly fed up in this country, both major parties, and finally they have an option that says none of the above on the ballot box or when they're being polled, except it says Reform on it. I think that's what a lot of this is. It is just a general sense of anger and despondency. As we get closer to a general election, still a long way away, and Reform are forced to come out with more policies, well, then there'll be more scrutiny on their position from voters coming from both parties. But we're not there yet.
We started to scrutinise it this week, and Richard Tice, he's been on this outlet this evening, and he was on earlier in the week when I said to him, would you do a deal with the Taliban to send people back to Afghanistan? And he said, sometimes you've got to deal with people who aren't your friends.
And Labour have said the same thing, which was not what anyone expected from a human rights barrister. But, you know, this kind of polling is not something now that you can say, well, it's just a flash in the pan. It does seem to be fairly steady. The issue, I think, for the Tories' issue is obviously just no one's voting for them anymore. But the Labour's issue is they're also losing vote, not just to Reform, but huge amounts to the Lib Dems as well, and the Greens. People are moving leftwards. And so if you are Keir Starmer and you've got Reform taking some of your votes and Ed Davey and the Green Party taking the rest of your votes, where do you tack your course to try and save some of them and bring them back? Because if you go too far to the right, you're losing even more to the left. If you've got to try and deal with this immigration issue, people say you're tacking to the right. If you're tacking to the left to try and save what's being knocked up over there, then, you know, Nigel Farage is going to come forward. But the real issue, I think, why we have, especially right now, a poll that's this solid, is that for the last 6 weeks of the summer break, the government media grid of announcements has had next to nothing in it. I mean, yesterday we had chickenpox vaccines, right? And every single week in recess, Nigel Farage has had a press conference. At those press conferences, he doesn't do what the Prime Minister does and take 4 questions that have already been agreed with his press officer and ignore everybody else. He took, I think, 45 questions at the press conference this week. He's taken them from everybody. Not because he wants to, because a lot of those questions are antagonistic or the same thing over and over again. He's doing it so that everybody gets the clip for their guy that they show on their outlet. And then he swamps the airwaves. It is a media strategy he's doing, and it's working. He doesn't have much political. Every time you ask him about a political situation, it changes.
Well, not much in the way of policy. We certainly know a policy on migration.
There's no sums on it, but he's got a great media strategy. And what Labour really needs to do is any media strategy at this point would be beneficial, but actually start, if you know you're coming up to a summer recess where there can be no political news, get something heavy in every week, even if it means getting Keir Starmer down to Hove with Angela Rayner and both vaping on the beach. Anything to get Farage out of the papers.
In which flat?
Go and have a fist fight with Angie on the beach.
That sounds like another scandal.
Hold that thought, because my media strategy is to go to a break right now. Coming up, we will discuss more of the day's story. Several papers are claiming tonight that the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, as Susie was alluding to there, could face an ethics investigation. We'll talk more about that next.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure. Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters. We love Trump! I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important. It's at the heart of the issue.
For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was the president.
If it was my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much, you know?
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor. Free wherever you get your news.
A young American medical student is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos, analysis, up at 6%. Podcasts, watching us live.
Joins us live.
All in one place, and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's Senior Ireland Correspondent. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace. The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland. Catholics and Protestants now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19, religion's nothing.
Sky News, the full story first.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview here on Sky News. With me in the studio, Benedict Spence and Susie Boniface. Let's delve straight back into the papers team. And this other story that we've done, obviously the migrant hotels, because that features in many papers. This story about Angela Rayner.
Not
Susie.
pictured.
That's Julia Roberts, in case you were squinting there, thinking it was another redhead. But Angela Rayner facing a sleaze inquiry, the Daily Telegraph says, on a tax dodge. Let's just explain this. She's bought a new flat in Hove because her partner's kids live there and he wants to be closer to them.
Absolutely fair enough.
She said that's now her main home, therefore not having to pay as much stamp duty on it as a result, but may not be her main home for council tax reasons. So it's a little bit confusing.
It's got in a mess. And if anyone remembers, before the election, there was a lot of hoo-ha about Angela Rayner having purchased her own council home many years ago and where she was her main residence and where was her secondary residence, because she had children here and somewhere else. And there's a bit of a kerfuffle about it. It all turned out to be fine and above board. But you would think, having been through a kerfuffle about your housing in opposition, that when you go and buy a place in government, you would go, let's just make sure this is all fine before we do it. And it does seem like there's something to be questioned here. So she's bought this property in Hove. Fair enough. Good thing to be doing. It seems like she has divorced her husband, who has the family home in Ashton-under-Lyne, but her name is still on the deed. But you can still... That often happens if you've had a divorce. Maybe you're holding it in, lieu for a child, something like that. So that's not automatically appalling. That could just be normal. But the property in Hove, she told the taxman that this was her main home, and therefore she paid £30,000 stamp duty on it. Now, if it had been a second home, it'd be £70,000 stamp duty. So she's had 40 grand less because it's her main home. But she is paying the council tax on that property that is for second homeowners, which is double what it would normally otherwise be. So she is paying extra council tax, but has paid less stamp duty. So she's either paying too much tax over the limit, or she's dodged the 40 grand on
And
the
the Tories
stamp
have jumped
duty.
on this. Kevin Hollinrake has written to the independent arbiter on standards, I think, Benedict, very quickly.
And as far as we're aware, there's nothing actually illegal, no suggestion that anything illegal has happened, just a bit of chicanery. It's never good to be doing chicanery at the same time that your government is drip-feeding stories into the media about potentially changing rules around things like capital gains tax on housing and telling everybody, look, you're all going to be taxed to the hilt.
Yeah.
It's just, how they say, not a good look. And, you know, you don't want to do government entirely by whether or not something is a good look, but nonetheless, I don't think there's going to be a lot of sympathy. Certainly not come October when everybody's taxes then go up, and with the housing market completely in the dumps.
We will leave that there because we have to head to the weather, and we can't even talk about the bananas that won't go brown on their way to the shops, says the Telegraph. Let's just take a quick look at the weather first.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, technically, we have 2 more days of summer left. Doesn't feel like it, though. The weather has got ahead of itself, turning autumnal for the weekend with low temperatures, showers and longer spells of rain, as well as strong winds. It will, though, be mostly dry overnight, bar a few coastal showers in the northwest of England. Towns and cities remaining fairly mild, but temperatures likely to fall back to single figures in rural areas like Kent.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
Fire, shouts the commander. There's a dash to safety.
We've now got to wait inside the shelter to see if there is incoming.
I'm Deborah Hames, Sky Security and Defence Editor. Should Russia's war with Ukraine escalate significantly, pilots like these could be called upon to go into combat for real.
Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city where there's a column of Russian armoury. I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
Good evening, it's 11 o'clock. This is Sky News' extended press preview with me, Matt Barbette. Our top story, more than 100 asylum seekers can stay at the Bell Hotel in Essex after a court ruling. It's a victory for the government, but it has provoked anger in Epping.
We are the English British citizens. We live here and they've got more rights than us. Wrong.
It's on their head, and if anything happens here from today, that's on them, because they've invited it.
Israel declares Gaza's largest city as a dangerous combat zone as it prepares for a full-scale assault. Over the next hour, we'll be discussing today's news with our reviewers Benedict Spence and Susie Boniface, and we'll speak to the editor of the Nottinghamshire Post after the local council run by Reform UK bans its journalists from speaking to councillors. And later, we'll have a full run-through of tomorrow's front pages as well. Good evening. On the face of it, the government secured a victory today over its decision to house asylum seekers in hotels. The Home Office won its appeal against a ban on asylum seekers living at the Bell, a small hotel in Essex that's become the epicentre of government crisis. Over the next hour, we'll bring you tonight's headlines, tomorrow's front pages, and the views of our paper reviewers as well, the political commentator Benedict Spence and the Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface. But first, despite weeks of protests, more than 100 people living in the Bell will be allowed to stay for now. Ministers, though, are bracing for more legal action from other local authorities around the country. Sky's Communities correspondent Becky Johnson reports now from Epping.
Protected by barriers and police, asylum seekers can remain at the Bell Hotel. Protesters who'd celebrated a court ruling to remove them have now seen it overturned.
I really got let down every way. All I can say is, I'm going to say it now, Starmer has to go.
We are the English British citizens. We live here and they've got more rights than us. Wrong.
Victory for the Home Office, leaving locals feeling defeated.
Our government have hung their heads in shame after today, because they were involved as well, wouldn't they? Come out and backed up the appeal, so it's on their head. And if anything happens here from today, that's on them, because they've invited it.
Anger sparked here last month when an asylum seeker was charged with sexually assaulting a local schoolgirl. Epping now the epicentre of a wave of protests that have spread across Britain. Overturning the temporary injunction to remove the asylum seekers here, the judge said it could have encouraged more disorder elsewhere.
This runs the risk of acting as an impetus or incentive for further protests, some of which may be disorderly, around asylum accommodation. At its worst, if even unlawful protests are to be treated as relevant, there is a risk of encouraging further lawlessness.
The judge said his ruling wasn't concerned with government policy on the housing of migrants, but the reality is that this goes to the very heart of the biggest political challenge facing the government. Public anger over migrant hotels is mounting and has been deepened by a Home Office lawyer saying the rights of asylum seekers trump the concerns of local residents. The Tories quick to criticise both the court's decision and the government.
I think the risk to lawlessness comes because we have a government that has lost control of our borders and a government that isn't listening, a government that is using the courts against the British people.
The Home Office forced to defend its record.
Well, nobody wants to close the Bell Hotel and all other asylum hotels more than me, and we have pledged that we are going to do that by the end of the Parliament. Today's judgment allows us to do it in a planned and managed way so that we can get the system running and make sure that we can exit hotels for once and for all.
Epping Council can return to court to fight for the hotel's closure again in October, but for the government, temporary relief. In other places where protests have spread, councils had been planning similar legal action. The question is, where would asylum seekers go? As public anger makes the use of hotels seem less and less sustainable. Becky Johnson, Sky News, Epping.
Let's see how tomorrow's papers are reacting to that story. The Times says more than a dozen councils are preparing legal action against the government despite the Home Office's legal win today. The Sun shows protesters who say they are furious over the court's decision, while the front of the Express features campaigners who say ministers should, in their words, hang their heads in shame after the Home Office victory. Let's get the thoughts of our guests, Benedict Spence and Susie Boniface. Benedict, you think this one's going to continue to rumble on as much as this is a sort of pause regarding the Bell Hotel in Epping? Others, as we mentioned there in the Times, are thinking of bringing their own legal cases.
Yes, and there are various different reasonings behind different places bringing their own cases, but this isn't going away. The hotels were only ever meant to be a temporary situation, but we've been talking about the small boats crisis and migrants coming that way since 2018 now. This has gone beyond being a temporary thing and is beginning to look, rather worryingly like a permanent solution. I mean, where the government's talking about closing migrant hotels in 2029, that will mean that this whole thing has gone on for over a decade, if that happens in 2029. And nobody is particularly enamoured by the current situation or even the proposals of how to end it, that they're going to put people then in private accommodation. Well, that's not going to go down very well at all. You have even less scrutiny over the individuals in question. You're competing against people in the housing market, potentially. You're less able, actually, to protect people from protests as much as anything else. So, but we will get to that when we come to it. In the short term, it is a question of kicking the can down the road. It's a gift to reform. Almost everything the government seems to do is a gift to reform, simply because it is just another, reinforcement of the fact that they don't seem to be across a lot of this, and they don't really seem to have much of a long-term strategy beyond simply kicking it down the road. It's also, I suppose, a gift to the Conservatives as and when we remember that they exist. But, ultimately, Farage is in the driving seat right now because at every turn, something happens that makes people very angry on a local level, and it manifests itself in ways like this.
Maybe a bit of a gift to the papers as well, Susie, because if we bring back the Sun front page, we were discussing earlier that this kind of front page is something that perhaps they wouldn't have done previously. It's a change of tack for them, perhaps because they think it's going to bring in readers.
Yeah, it's working, I suppose, for a lot of newspapers and a lot of politicians as well, because it's really simple. And you can just say, asylum seekers, bad, and you're done. And there is a huge amount of nuance to all of this, which doesn't get discussed. And the government is so bad at talking about the victories it's had smashing gangs or closing down hotels, which it has managed to do. No one is pointing out, for example, they're protesting about someone who is accused, not convicted yet, accused and still on trial of a sexual assault, who isn't in that hotel anymore. And the assumption is that everybody in that hotel is just a rapist waiting to burst out, which is obviously mad about any group of people. It doesn't matter where they're from. It's a mad thing to say. But any of that nuance, any of that discussion doesn't happen because it becomes this very simple binary issue, for or against, pro or anti, black and white, and literally. And it gives people the room to say, I'm not racist, but I just think it's part of the thing, as we saw with Ryland Clark this week. And actually, if you're at those protests and you're standing next to someone who is saying something racist, and many of them are, if you're standing next to someone who's there just because he wants to headbutt the police van, which they are, and going out wearing masks and they want to have a fight because it's the summer and that's what they're doing, there comes a point where you can say, well, I'm not far right, but I'm just happen to be standing next to someone who is far right, who is here because it is organised by the far right, who is saying far right things, and the only people who are benefiting from this is the far right. If you want to protest the asylum hotel system, which is a complete mess, one of the things you've got to start doing is acknowledging the fact that Parliament has given those people more rights. The Parliament they all voted for has told the Home Secretary she must house asylum seekers. There is no right for the Home Secretary, there's no duty to house people who are British. So there is slightly more right to it, but that's our Parliament has decided to do it.
Reform UK wouldn't characterise themselves as far right, they characterise themselves as right wing, but they are benefiting if the polls are to be believed, and I don't think we've got it, but the front of tomorrow's Eye shows but they are 15 points ahead of Labour, 35% to 20 in terms of polling.
I think it's unfair to characterise Reform as far right. I think that they are reactionary. I don't think that, I've got to be honest actually about, the average fascist party. It tends to be quite well organised with a central ideology. I don't think Reform actually has anything approaching that at all. It reacts from the inability of whatever the government is of the day to actually perform the basic duties that people expect it to do. And that isn't just about immigration. Let's be very clear about that. There are many other things. This just happens to be the flashpoint for this particular round of stories. But yeah, Reform, because they are just sitting there waiting, not actually, they don't have a great deal of responsibility. I know they have a few local councils, but actually they haven't got sort of the full weight of the state on them, never have. They are a very effective campaign group. You've got to look at them, where this party has actually come from, its previous iteration as the Brexit Party, and where that sort of evolved from the sort of the dregs of UKIP. That's what you've got to look at it. It's an incredibly effective campaigning machine. It knows how to do that. It's very good at doing that. And right now, the government is making it incredibly easy for that campaign machine to not even really have to get out of second gear. And, I keep joking about the Conservatives, but again, they're just not there. Nobody really knows what it is that they're going to say, other than that they're going to say something like what Nigel Farage said yesterday, and they're going to try and sound tougher on it. And that's their strategy right now. That's about it.
OK. Well, next, Nottinghamshire County Council, which is controlled by Reform UK, has come under criticism for banning reporters from its local paper from speaking to any of its councillors, claiming the Nottingham Post's coverage has been unfair. Earlier on, my colleague Jonathan Samuels spoke to the party's deputy leader, Richard Tice, and asked him whether they are entitled to be selective about who they speak to.
Of course you can. That's the whole point of a democracy. That's the whole point of a democracy. You pick and choose who you speak to, and sometimes you speak to friends, sometimes you don't. But it is equally a media organisation does have a responsibility also to present some things in a sensible way, presenting both sides of a debate or an argument, and that was the issue there.
So you want to be held to account, but only by people that you like and agree with?
We want to be held to account by people who are going to be rational, sensible, and not completely distorted and biased.
Well, perhaps unsurprisingly, the weekend edition of the Nottingham Post is leading with that story. The headline, Reform warning to news outlets sets dangerous precedent. I'm pleased to say joining us live now is Natalie Fay, the editor of Nottinghamshire Live, which runs the Nottingham Post. Natalie, thanks for joining us. What do you make of this? What do you make of it?
What do I make of it? Well, I'm absolutely gobsmacked by Richard Tice's comments. Just to start off with, he's accused our journalists of distorting the facts and being completely irresponsible. I've got screen grabs of the conversation that occurred between Nottinghamshire County Council leader Mick Barton and our reporter Oliver Pridmore. So I know that we're not distorting the facts and we're not being completely irresponsible. What do I make of the ban? Well, it's completely unprecedented. All of my colleagues have been speechless about it. I've had much industry support from other journalists, from people like Society of Editors and the National Union of Journalists. This is just not the thing that elected representatives should be doing. They have a responsibility to be accountable, to be transparent, to answer questions from reporters like those from Nottinghamshire Live and other publications. And it is an extremely worrying thing to do. And if this is a precursor or rehearsal for a Nigel Farage government, which many are saying could be, we've just seen the poll results there, then what the hell is the government going to be like? If you publish something the government doesn't like, you'll be cast out, you won't be allowed to ask any more questions. Yeah. And then the people who voted for reform are going to start saying, how come we can't find out what's going on?
Natalie, I know...
this is where it all started, in Nottinghamshire.
I know local news coverage in recent decades has been much diminished and it's a tricky place to be, but are there competitors of yours who will be allowed to ask the Reform Council their questions?
Well, if we're talking about Nottinghamshire in particular, we have the BBC, of course, but they don't cover in the same depth that we do. I totally respect what the BBC do, but if you look at their website, they produce fewer stories than we do. We're the ones who are at the planning meetings, the full council meetings, the cabinet meetings. We are speaking to politicians on and off the record all the time. We're the ones who are out doing vox pops. The breadth of our coverage is, you know, the most in our area.
And I know you
so
want to...
will competitors be stepping in there? I mean, not really. So there's going to be a news vacuum.
I know you want to scrutinise what the democratically elected representatives are doing there, understandably, but are you sensing support from your readers in your coverage of this? And perhaps they'll stick with you, perhaps you'll put on even more readers, because if nothing else, a row always attracts attention.
Yeah, well, that's been the thing that's worried me, because I don't think people realise really at the moment what they're going to be missing out on. They think they've got Lee Anderson's Facebook page and they think they can get their news from that. Just to be clear, Lee Anderson's also joined the boycott. But, and you know, at the moment, Reform are in a bit of a honeymoon period. The polls are really in their favour. They're reacting to everything, getting some good coverage. Things feel good for Reform. But when we get maybe 2, 3, 4 years down the line, and we see that support starting to go down a bit, people might start saying, well, hang on a minute, why can't we ask any questions? What is going on? And so it's going to be a bit of a long game, I think. But at the moment, a lot of people are saying, yeah, we don't need mainstream media, we don't need journalists. And so we've got to get out here, like I'm doing tonight, and spread the message that, in fact, you do, because you voted for these people and you want to know how your council tax money is being spent. This is one of the only ways to do it.
Really appreciate your time, Natalie, this evening. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Let's bring Susie and Benedict back in on this very briefly. Susie, what's your take?
I worked in local newspapers for 5 years.
Yeah.
And I've got to say, compared to national government, the people who work in local elected officials are frequently more likely to be power-mad tin pot dictators who would do very well in a failing state. And I think it's going to bite them on the bum, because at some point, the Nottinghamshire Post, who has local democracy reporters who are in those meetings, are going to be going to Mick Barton and others and saying, can I have a comment on this? Because you've been accused of X. And we need to get your right. You have a right to reply. We have an ethical duty to ask you to respond to this. And if he goes, no, I'm not talking to you, then what's going to happen is there's loads of stories are going to start going in that paper that are not with his flow on top of it at all. Yeah. It's going to affect that.
Interesting, Benedict, though, isn't it, that plenty of groups, not just political parties, plenty think they just don't need to be scrutinised or answer those questions. They've got their own mouthpieces now, whether it's Lee Anderson's Facebook page or anywhere else, and they can use it themselves.
I thought that the point at the end about how people feel, and it is that expression, mainstream media, people don't need the mainstream media because there are alternative sources of media out there. Yeah. And it does, I mean, you know...
Alternative facts,
yes, there are lots of different, you know, connotations with that. And I suppose if we want to sort of take the morality of that aside, it's a gamble of a strategy. You need to really be on top of your information output, so to speak, if you want to keep that going. And you need to entirely know your audience inside out, which I think is a bit of a tricky thing for Reform right now, because its supporters are coming from quite a broad church, so to speak, far broader in many ways than either of the two traditional parties. That's a tricky thing to try to manage. But I suppose right now, they're stepping back and they're looking at the government and the official opposition and saying, well, we're not really competing with a lot here. And actually, this is a gamble we can afford to take.
But is this not cancel culture?
Yeah.
A cancel culture council? Yeah. Try saying that when you're drunk. It's a cancel culture council run by snowflakes. Run by snowflakes who've got the hump, and not because Natalie and her reporter got anything wrong. Yeah. They have not criticised the actual reporting. They just said, we'd rather you didn't do it, or in that way.
Whether it's this party or any other, I think it's interesting what Natalie Faye pointed out there. A honeymoon period can be intoxicating. If things go wrong for any council, then they'll feel the scrutiny of the press, whether they're answering the questions or not, won't they? And certainly the people who put the council there will want
answers. It's starting to go wrong already, because the original story that was kicking this off was because a couple of his councillors were saying that we can't do anything because he'll kick us out. So and that has all been reported, and that's what's led to all this. And if you're reacting in that kind of way, if you if you start cancelling people as a counsellor, then
you started it.
Then that just shows how sensitive, tender, and paranoid you are, and that's the state that particular cancellation counsellor is in at the moment. So.
You are watching the press preview, another tongue twister there, here on Sky News. The Express are reporting that Israel will not be allowed to send a delegation to next month's defence exhibition in London. We'll discuss the situation in Gaza next.